The wind was bitter, slicing through the ruins of what was once a bustling city. Zarek felt it sting his skin, but he barely acknowledged the sensation. His mind was focused entirely on the mission ahead, his enhanced senses alert to every subtle shift in the environment. The mission: find the source of the rogue hybrid attacks that had been decimating the last pockets of human resistance. But something was wrong, too quiet, too perfect. He stood motionless, scanning the horizon. A shimmering wall of sand and ash rose in the distance, the remnants of a once vibrant city now reduced to skeletons of buildings. Above, the sky was bruised with the fading light of an alien sunset. The sound of distant gunfire echoed in the air, sporadic, chaotic, but not close enough. Not enough to be heard by the enemy. "Zarek," came the low voice of Commander Hyrule, crackling through his comm device. "Report. We need eyes on the target. Can you see anything?" Zarek's grip tightened on his pulse rifle, the cool metal familiar in his hands. His mind processed the question. His enhanced vision flared to life, every contour of the war-torn city sharply outlined in his mind's eye. The coordinates matched, but no enemy movement appeared. The silence pressed against him like a physical force. "I'm not seeing anything yet," he replied, his voice flat, betraying none of the unease creeping under his skin. "But it's too quiet. Something's off. Stay alert. It's a trap, most likely. You know what we're dealing with. Find the hybrids, take them down. Hyrule out." He turned, surveying the resistance team, 5 soldiers, all trained, all hardened by years of fighting. Lyra, the newest recruit, was scanning the area to his left, her eyes sharp, her movements tense. She had potential, Zarek had to admit, but trust wasn't something you could build overnight, not after what they'd all been through. He didn't even trust himself. Lyra caught his gaze for a moment, and Zarek saw the flicker of something in her eyes, suspicion, maybe, or fear. It didn't matter. She had her doubts about him. The hybrid Asleal program wasn't exactly a badge of honor for humanity. They'd created him, enhanced his body with alien technology, making him both more than human and somehow less than human at the same time. The other soldiers knew what he was, and though they never said it aloud, the whispers in the dark were deafening. "Stay sharp, Zarek," Lyra said, her tone edged with caution. "We don't need any surprises." "Tell that to the aliens," he muttered under his breath, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the desolate ruins again. There was nothing, no sign of movement, no footprints in the sand, not even the faintest disturbance in the air. It was too still, too controlled. Then came the sound, a faint hum, almost imperceptible, like a high-pitched whisper beneath the winds. Zarek's instincts flared to life. Something was approaching, moving too quickly to be natural. It was only a split second before the ground beneath them trembled violently, a deep rumble that reverberated through their bones. Without warning, a figure erupted from the debris, moving faster than any human could. The hybrids had arrived, but these weren't like the others they had encountered. This one was different, more refined, more dangerous. Its skin was a shimmering gray, almost metallic in appearance, and its eyes glowed with an unsettling intensity. It moved with the precision of a predator, its every movement calculated. Zarek's hand shot to his weapon, but Lyra was faster. She fired first, her plasma shot a streak of bright blue light that tore through the air. The hybrid dodged, twisting unnaturally, its movements too swift to track. It countered, launching itself toward them with a horrifying screech, claws extending from its hands. "Watch out!" Zarek shouted, but the warning was too late. The hybrid collided with Lyra, sending her crashing into a broken column. The resistance soldiers opened fire, but their shots seemed ineffective, bouncing off the creature's seemingly invulnerable skin. Zarek moved without thinking, his body a blur of motion as he closed the distance between himself and the enemy. The hybrid turned its gaze to him, and for a fleeting moment, Zarek's heart skipped. There was recognition in those alien eyes. It wasn't just an enemy, it was one of his own kind. "Why are you doing this?" Zarek shouted, his voice sharp with disbelief. The hybrid's mouth twisted into a grotesque mockery of a smile, a rasping voice echoing in Zarek's mind. Because we are meant to rule. You are always one of us. Zarek's blood ran cold as the full weight of the truth slammed into him. The hybrids were no longer just soldiers, they were revolutionaries, and the war they were waging was not just against the aliens. It was against humanity itself. He barely registered Lyra's cry of pain as the hybrid swiped at her, leaving a deep gash across her chest. The others were backing up, but there was no time to retreat. Zarek's pulse raced, his mind spinning with the implications. He had to act. He had to stop this, but how? Before he could process another thought, the hybrid lunged again, its claws outstretched toward his chest. Zarek's instincts took over. He sidestepped, letting the hybrid pass inches from him. With a swift, fluid motion, he thrust his weapon forward and fired a concentrated energy blast directly into the creature's chest. The hybrid screeched, a sound that echoed through the ruins, but it didn't fall. Instead, it jerked back, its glowing eyes fixed on him. Not even you, Zarek, can stop what's coming. The hybrid's words lingered in the air as it melted back into the shadows, disappearing into the rubble. Zarek's breath caught. This was just the beginning. The air in the underground bunker was thick with the scent of burning fuel and the sharp tang of sweat. Zarek wiped his brow, his pulse still thumping in his ears from the fight above ground. The adrenaline that had spiked in the heat of battle now drained into a hollow ache deep in his chest. He could still hear the screeching of the hybrid's voice echoing in his mind, mocking him. Not even you, Zarek, can stop what's coming. He shook his head. It wasn't a challenge, it was a warning. And it was one he couldn't ignore. Zarek. Lyra's voice broke through his thoughts, sharp and full of suspicion. She stood in the doorway of the command room, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, the blood-stained bandage on her side a stark reminder of the attack. She hadn't asked for help, though he could see the grimace on her face. Her pride, too strong for her own good. He turned to face her. What is it? Lyra didn't answer immediately, her eyes scanning him like a predator sizing up its prey. You know what I'm talking about, she said finally, her voice low but filled with accusation. That hybrid. It spoke to you. Why? Zarek didn't flinch. He had expected this. He had been waiting for it. Because it was one of my kind, he replied, his voice measured. A rogue, just like me. Lyra's eyes hardened. A rogue? I don't care what you say, Zarek. It looked like one of them, alien-possessed, unrecognizable from the rest. It wasn't human anymore. And if you think it's the same, you're just as lost as they are. The words stung, though he wouldn't show it. He had heard worse. He had been worse. But it was always different when it was from her. I didn't choose this, he muttered, more to himself than to her. I didn't choose to be part of their experiments. Lyra's gaze softened, just for a moment. It was barely noticeable, but it was there. For a heartbeat, Zarek thought she might offer some comfort, some small understanding. But then the walls came back up, and her voice was hard again. And what now? You're just going to walk around telling us you're still on our side? If you're so sure about who you are, prove it. Take down the other hybrids. Stop hiding behind your excuses. Her challenge hung in the air, weighty and painful, but Zarek didn't flinch. He couldn't. She was right. He couldn't hide anymore. Not from her, not from himself. I am going to stop them, he said slowly, his jaw tight with resolve. But first, we need to know what we're dealing with. These aren't just rogue soldiers, they're part of something bigger. Lyra's expression shifted, suspicion flaring again. And how do you know that? I fought beside them. I remember what they were capable of. This isn't just about us. It's about the war we didn't see coming. A silence stretched between them, thick with the weight of unsaid words. Finally, Lyra exhaled sharply, her shoulders sagging as if she were weighing the choice of trusting him or walking away. Fine. Let's say you're right. But what do we do now? We've been fighting a losing battle for years, and I don't think this is going to change that. Zarek's eyes narrowed. Then we make sure it does. He turned, heading toward the maps on the wall. The intricate lines of resistance-controlled territories were slowly shrinking, engulfed by the alien forces and now, by the rogue hybrids. He studied the map with laser focus, his mind racing through strategies, through possibilities. It's not just about fighting, he continued, his voice low. It's about finding their leader. The one who's pulling the strings behind all of this. The one who's been manipulating both us and them. Lyra moved closer, her boots silent against the concrete floor. You think there's someone out there worse than the aliens themselves? That's a bold claim, even for you. Zarek's finger traced a series of coordinates on the map, the locations of recent hybrid sightings. His eyes hardened. I know there is. And if we don't find them first, everything we've done, every life we've lost, it will be for nothing. The room was silent again, the hum of the bunker's generator the only sound. Lyra's face twisted with doubt, but the fire that had been there before started to flicker in her eyes. She was beginning to believe him. We move out at dawn, Zarek said, turning to meet her gaze directly. We find the leader, we end this. Lyra studied him for a moment longer, then nodded, the decision made. Dawn. But I'm not trusting you, yet. Zarek didn't expect her to. He didn't trust himself. Not fully. But this time, he had no choice. Outside, the wind howled through the cracked walls of the bunker, the low growl of distant artillery in the background. The war was far from over. It was only just beginning. And Zarek knew one thing for certain, the future of humanity was hanging by a thread, and he was the only one who could cut it loose. He turned back to the map, focusing on the unknown. A new battle was coming, and this time, it wouldn't be fought on their terms. It would be fought on his. Lyra's voice broke through his thoughts again. Zarek, you ever wonder if we're just fighting to survive, or if we're fighting to win? He glanced back at her. There was something raw in her voice, a desperation that matched his own. I'm fighting to win, he said, his words final. And that's something we'll both have to learn. They stood in the silence of the bunker, two warriors against the tide, unsure of what the next dawn would bring, but certain they couldn't back down now. Dawn broke over the shattered city, painting the sky in blood-red hues. The remnants of an ancient civilization lay sprawled beneath the oppressive silence, a graveyard of rusted metal and stone. Zarek, Lyra, and the rest of the resistance squad moved through the crumbling streets with the careful precision of hunters. Each step was calculated, quiet but swift, there was no room for mistakes. The air felt thick with the threat of something more dangerous than the usual alien forces lurking just beyond the horizon. Zarek's eyes flicked to the map once again. The coordinates were nearly pinpointed, they were close now. We're entering the last sector, Zarek said in a low voice. He glanced back at Lyra, who was keeping pace beside him, her gaze scanning the surroundings with a predator's intensity. Stay sharp. If the hybrid leader is here, we won't find it in the open. Lyra nodded, her expression unreadable. You keep saying that, but I still don't understand why you think there's a leader. Why would they suddenly stop being rogue and start organizing? Zarek hesitated, his mind churning with fragments of the truth he hadn't fully pieced together. He knew more than he was letting on. The hybrids were too coordinated now, too methodical. But every time he tried to connect the dots, his own memories, altered, fragmented, and manipulated, blocked the path. I've fought with them before, Zarek finally said, his voice steady but tinged with something else, something deeper. They were just soldiers. Now they're something else. They're following orders. Someone is commanding them. Lyra's sharp gaze softened for just a moment, as if she were about to press him further. But then, her eyes flicked to the skyline, and she stiffened. Movement. East sector. A lot of it. Zarek's pulse quickened. The feeling in his gut had been gnawing at him ever since the night before. They were walking into a trap, he could feel it. Form up, he ordered, snapping his fingers, and the squad fell into formation around him. Their weapons were ready, their faces grim. They all knew that once they entered this sector, there would be no turning back. As they made their way toward the heart of the ruined city, Zarek's mind raced. He had faced hybrids before, seen their raw power, their ferocity. But this was different. This time, the stakes were higher. If the leader of the rogue hybrids was here, everything they had fought for could be at risk. The aliens had been dangerous enough, but if the hybrids were no longer simply mercenaries, they would be unstoppable. A low growl echoed from behind them, and Zarek whirled, pulse rifle snapping into place, eyes searching the shadows. His mind instinctively took in every detail, every shift in the air, but there was nothing. The growl sounded again, closer now, almost rhythmic. "What the hell is that?" Lyra whispered, stepping closer to Zarek. Her eyes searched the buildings around them, her breath steady, but the tension in her stance spoke volumes. Zarek's instincts flared. "Get ready. It's a trap." Before he could finish his warning, the ground beneath them shook, and a wave of sound exploded in the air. From the shadows, a dozen hybrids leaped toward them, their movements impossibly fast, their glowing eyes locked onto their targets. Zarek's hand shot up, and the resistance squad opened fire. Blasts of blue energy lit up the street, tearing through the night. Zarek ducked behind an overturned vehicle, his rifle booming in his hands, his senses alive with the rush of battle. His enhanced vision saw everything in sharp, brilliant detail, the way the hybrids twisted mid-air, dodging his shots with inhuman agility, their claws flashing in the dim light. "Zarek! Move!" Lyra's voice cut through the chaos as one of the hybrids landed too close, slashing at her with ferocity. She barely had time to react, her rifle snapping to her shoulder just in time to fire a point-blank shot into its face. But there were too many. More were coming from all sides, and the squad was starting to falter, their movements slower, their ammunition running low. "We need backup," one of the soldiers shouted, her voice hoarse with panic. Zarek's eyes scanned the area. They were being overwhelmed, but there was a gap, a small alley to the left. He knew the city's layout from years of scouting, and if they could just make it there. He turned to Lyra, who was fending off another hybrid with a vicious battle cry. "Lyra! We move now!" Her head snapped up, her face streaked with dirt and blood. She nodded, gritting her teeth. "On your mark." Zarek counted down in his mind. "Now!" The squad broke for the alley, running at full speed as the hybrids pursued them, their screeches echoing through the ruins. Zarek pushed through the pain in his legs, adrenaline giving him the strength to keep running, to lead the charge. But as they reached the mouth of the alley, the hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. A figure stepped into view. It wasn't a hybrid. It wasn't even human. Tall and cloaked in shadows, with eyes that shimmered like molten gold, the figure spoke in a voice that sent a cold chill through Zarek's spine. "You're late," it said. "The storm has already begun." Zarek froze. The leader. The one he'd been searching for. And everything he thought he knew, about the hybrids, about the war, was about to change. "Who are you?" Zarek demanded, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. The figure's lips curled into a sinister smile. "I'm the one who'll end this war. And I'm just getting started." Zarek's heart pounded in his chest, his grip tightening on his rifle. This was it, the moment that would decide everything. The wind howled through the ruins, carrying with it the scent of decay and the weight of the coming storm. The figure before Zarek seemed to blur with the shadows, its presence both haunting and unearthly. The golden eyes glowed like molten metal, sharp and unsettling, an unmistakable promise of power. Zarek's grip tightened on his rifle, but his mind was already shifting into overdrive. This wasn't just another hybrid, they were dealing with something far more dangerous. His thoughts raced, trying to connect the fragments of intel he had gathered over the years, all the pieces of a puzzle that had never fully made sense. "I've been waiting for you, Zarek," the figure said, its voice like ice scraping against steel. "And you've brought company." Lyra stepped beside him, her rifle raised and steady, her eyes locked onto the figure with a mix of fury and caution. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice unwavering despite the tension in the air. The figure smiled, though it wasn't a smile that brought comfort, it was the kind of smile that signaled the beginning of something terrible. I am the one who pulls the strings. The one who has orchestrated everything you fought against. Zarek's pulse quickened. The leader. The one behind the rogue hybrids. The manipulator. I should have known, he muttered. All of this, it was you. The figure's smile widened. How quaint. You still believe this war is about survival. It's much bigger than that, Zarek. It's about evolution. The hybrids, my hybrids, are merely the next step in humanity's journey. They've already surpassed you. Zarek stepped forward, his voice cold. No. The hybrids are nothing but puppets. And you've used them to turn the tide of this war. But that ends now. The figure's eyes glowed brighter, almost blindingly so. You're mistaken, human. You still think you're the ones who are fighting. I am the one who will end this. And I will reshape the world in my image. Without warning, the figure raised its hand. The ground trembled beneath them, the sky darkening as if the very atmosphere had become a weapon. Zarek felt a surge of heat, an oppressive energy pushing against his chest. Get down, he shouted, pushing Lyra to the ground as a blast of pure force erupted from the figure's palm. The shockwave sent debris flying in every direction, and Zarek felt the ground buck beneath him, his body slamming into the earth. His vision blurred, the ringing in his ears deafening. But in the chaos, Zarek's mind remained clear. He had to act. Lyra groaned beside him, her hand grabbing his shoulder. Zarek, what? The figure was advancing, moving with terrifying speed, its eyes locked onto them like a predator closing in on its prey. Zarek pushed himself to his feet, his rifle still in hand. You're out of your depth, the figure sneered, voice dripping with contempt. This world doesn't belong to you anymore. Zarek's eyes narrowed, and for the first time in years, the weight of his past, of the years spent fighting, of the betrayals, fueled his resolve. He wasn't fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for something greater, humanity's future. I'm not fighting for me, Zarek said, his voice low but filled with conviction. I'm fighting for them. He shifted his weight, taking aim at the figure. And I will destroy everything you've built. With a roar, he fired. The shot rang out, cutting through the air, the energy blast hitting the figure square in the chest. It staggered back for a moment, its golden eyes flickering, but it did not fall. You really think a single shot will stop me? The figure laughed. You cannot kill what is already inevitable. The words were a death sentence, but Zarek didn't falter. He couldn't. Not now. Lyra surged to her feet, flanking Zarek. We don't need to kill you, she said, her voice low and deadly. We just need to break your hold. Zarek understood immediately. The figure wasn't invincible, but it had power, power that came from its control over the hybrids. Destroying the source of that control was the only way to stop it. You're not in control anymore, Zarek said, taking another shot. This time, he aimed for the figure's head, aiming for the neural connection that held its power together. The figure flinched, but it did not fall. For a brief moment, Zarek hesitated. A shadow of doubt crossed his mind. Could he really destroy this being, this force of nature? But then he remembered the people they had lost, the countless lives ruined by this war. He couldn't afford to hesitate. With a final, resounding shot, Zarek struck the figure's heart, sending a surge of energy through its body. The figure gasped, its eyes flashing in a brief moment of disbelief, and then, like a light flickering out, it collapsed. The air went still. The sky above them cleared, the oppressive weight lifting, leaving only the sound of heavy breathing. Zarek stood, his heart pounding in his chest, his mind reeling from the magnitude of what had just transpired. They had won. The war wasn't over, but this battle, this fight, was theirs. Lyra stepped beside him, her eyes scanning the horizon. It's over, she said, though her voice carried the weight of someone who knew the victory was only a small part of the larger war. Zarek nodded, exhaustion settling into his bones. For now, he replied, his gaze locked on the horizon, on the uncertain future that awaited them. He had fought for humanity. And though the war wasn't over, it was no longer about survival alone. It was about hope. And hope, for once, felt like something real.